Hi, my name is Lauren Stevens, and I was born profoundly deaf. You're probably questioning my ability to talk to you today, but all my life I've had to practice hearing and talking in order to converse within society. Here's a question for you. When you encounter a deaf person, how do you initially perceive them? As a person disabled than yourself, a member of a culture, or simply a normal member of society? I am the only one in my family who is deaf, and I have encountered all of these perceptions. When I was diagnosed with profound hearing loss at 10 weeks old, my parents faced a dilemma. They could choose to raise me with New Zealand Sign Language, or they could choose to enroll me into early intervention programs, which would teach me to hear and to speak. As a result, they faced two strongly opposing views. The deaf community told them that they were denying my rights as a deaf child if I did not learn New Zealand Sign Language, and that my deaf identity would be stripped away from me. Rather than perceiving deafness as a disability, it is perceived as something you were born with, and is a difference that should be embraced. In contrast, the hearing world argued that if I did not acquire verbal and auditory skills, I would have to be held back in school and in many areas of development. Because I grew up in a small town that did not have a large deaf community, my mother was determined that I would learn spoken language so that I would be able to successfully interact within society. And my dad, who is a musician, wanted me to grow up sharing his passion for the Beatles and Led Zeppelin. Thus, I was enrolled into an extensive auditory verbal program in Australia at St. Gabriel's School for the Deaf. At St. Gabriel's, I was taught to come into spoken language through using what little residual hearing I had with the help of my hearing aid. Hearing exercises involved the complete removal of visual cues, such as lip reading, so that I'd have to listen for certain vowels and consonants to identify a word. For example, if I was spoken to, the speaker would place their hand over their mouth, like this, so I wouldn't be able to read their lips. I began this program when I was 5 months old and successfully completed the curriculum at 5 years old. This process set me on the path to integrate in a world for the hearing. I was then enrolled in a mainstream school, and the way I experienced situations in the hearing world as a deaf child was vastly different than that of my peers. Deafness can be isolating, as it's considered to be an invisible physical disability, and not many people understand what it means to be deaf. Now, with my hearing aid, I could only hear up to a certain point, and it wasn't until I received a cochlear implant that I realized just how bad my hearing was. Previously, I could only hear very low frequency sounds, but with the cochlear implant, it opened me up to an entire new world. I can now hear the clock ticking, bees buzzing, and my personal favorite, the sound of a moorpork on a summer's night. Yet, there is always something I miss out on. For example, if I'm conversing within a large group of people, it's like walking into a bar at 2 a.m. full of drunk first-year university students just yelling over top of one another. I have no idea what they're saying or which direction the voices are coming from. This is just one example that serves as a reminder that I am still too deaf to be completely part of the hearing world. Now, the deaf world I had very little association with. I grew up with 1 or 2 deaf children, but they signed. I was unable to communicate directly with them and relied on my teacher aide to interpret what they were saying. As a result, I felt alienated from the deaf community, as there was a huge language barrier that I did not know or understand. I was reluctant to become involved, as I felt more comfortable being in the hearing world where I was able to socialize and communicate with others. Admittedly, I viewed members of the deaf community as people who were even more disabled than I was. because they did not have the hearing or oral skills that I have, so I could not understand how they were able to succeed and interact within society. So, what changed my perspective? When I began learning sign language at university, it suddenly became so much more than just a university paper. In the first class of the course, I had no idea what to expect. The teachers themselves are deaf and do not use spoken language. But because of this, I did not feel the pressure to work harder than others and felt like I was on an equal playing field with everyone. It was then I realized that deafness is not a disability, it is an identity. And learning New Zealand Sign Language helped me find this identity as a deaf individual. I then wanted to experience what it was like being in the deaf community firsthand, so I began going to regular events set up by the Wellington Deaf Society. The deaf community does not just involve deaf people, but hearing people who have deaf parents or deaf children. Although I was surrounded by technically strangers, there was a feeling of belonging and familiarity that I did not quite experience in the hearing world. Members of the deaf community may not share the same political views or religious beliefs, but what brings them together as a culture is the art of sign language and shared experiences. Deaf people have all experienced complications and frustrations in trying to navigate in a predominantly oral society, especially and that society is limited when the social requirements of deaf people are not well catered for. One misperception is that deaf people are limited as to what they can and can't do. They do not see themselves as incapable and focus on their abilities rather than what we would consider to be a disability. They have this perception because in the past, deafness was viewed as a condition that had to be treated. Suppose you're a deaf person in the early to mid-20th century, a time when communicating in any other language except spoken English was strongly discouraged. Sign language especially was too different, too outstanding, and was perceived to be an embarrassment or an incapacity that had to be corrected. As a result, language barriers were set up between the two worlds. One point I want to emphasize here is that sign language is not a universal language. It differs based on the collective society of a particular country. New Zealand Sign Language was only formally recognised as New Zealand's third official language in 2006, but there is still a lack of exposure around the importance of this language as a basic right for deaf people. New Zealand Sign Language, in many ways, is not just a form of communication, it is an art. Signers use dimensions of time and space to perform visualizations of stories and poetry. Greatly contrasting from spoken English, it is a vibrant, expressive language, and although sentences are structured in simple forms, it is the way the signs are conveyed that express a lot of meaning. For example, facial expression is a key concept used to identify between a question or a statement, and often signs depend entirely on context to understand the conversation. When learning New Zealand Sign Language, for some people it can be a step out of their comfort zone, as it's a very emotive language, and they may not be used to communicating in such a bold, visible way. I was at a party a few months ago, and a friend of mine, who is also learning New Zealand Sign Language, began a conversation with me on opposite sides of the room by signing. It wasn't long until I realised that the room had gone dead quiet. About 15-20 people had stopped their conversations and were just watching us. With spoken language, it's easy to ignore the conversation of another person, but when signing, it's hard not to draw attention to something that is rarely seen in the general public. Sorry, I'm just getting a little bit feedback from the microphone here. Now, when people first meet me, most do not realize I am deaf. Usually the first thing I am asked is, do you have an accent, don't you? Are you from Europe? And I'd dearly love to say yes here because it makes me sound so much more sophisticated. But growing up, I wanted to perfect my speech so that people would be able to understand me better and that I'd gain the confidence to speak in front of audiences. An additional 12 years of speech therapy and speech competitions helped me achieve this. However, I soon came to realize that not everyone responded the same way when I said, actually, I have an accent because I'm deaf. And I would become concerned that they would not see me as a person equal to them. One instance was when I was at a careers expo at university and was having a discussion with a recruiter about social work. At one point I mentioned that I was, in fact, deaf, and their attitude instantly changed. They then said that, well, in that case, perhaps a role in communications wouldn't be suitable for you, but of course there are other roles in administration you could consider. And I was thinking, okay, well, if communication is such an issue for me, how exactly are we carrying out this conversation right now? This was a huge blow to my confidence, and often the doubt of others strongly impacts my own sense of self-worth. Am I really not as capable as I think I am? But becoming part of the deaf community taught me that deafness is not a limitation, and that there is no reason as to why there are language barriers between worlds. When I was diagnosed as a profoundly deaf child, this placed me inside a box. Although I received the therapy and education that set me up for a life inside the hearing world, I was still perceived as disabled. That, because I am deaf, there are certain things I cannot do. But for me, I do not see myself as someone who is severely lacking in the hearing department, because deafness is normal for me. I always get the best night's sleep, without fail, and that includes sleeping through my flatmates' raging house parties. By embracing the differences between the deaf world and the hearing world, it will create opportunities to open up doors for communication, rather than set up and maintain the barriers that are currently in place. There is evidence that New Zealand Sign Language, as a visual mode of learning for both deaf and hearing children, have been effective in brain development and cognitive processing, regardless of whether they use spoken language or not. It is a basic right for all deaf people to be able to develop their linguistic and cultural identity by signing. Research has shown that by both signing and reading or speaking, deaf people are more likely to achieve academic success and fully participate as an active member within the wider community. As an oral society, we have the tools and the responsibility to make this world a more inclusive place for those who do not communicate orally. I had always thought that being part of the hearing world was the be-all, end-all of effective communication as a person with hearing loss. But becoming part of the deaf community opened a door to a culture I did not know existed and a language of my own right. Thank you.